Welcome to the 97 Republic YouTube channel, where I react to UFC news and live events. So I kindly ask that you hit the like button and the subscribe button, as that would really help this channel grow. And to ensure that you don't skip a beat, feel free to click the notification bell as well. That way you can ensure that you don't miss any of the action. I really hope you enjoy this one. UFC Fight Night main event, Manel Kape versus Asu Almabayev, and in this video basically gonna look at both fighters' respective professional careers, with the emphasis obviously being on the UFC. Starting off with Manel Kape, due to the fact that there's somewhat more to talk about when speaking about Manel Kape. He has had 27 fights in his professional career, won 20 of them, lost 7 of them. And within the UFC, he has had 8 fights where he's won 5 of them and lost 3 of them. Now, before I actually go into his UFC career, one important aspect of Manel Kape's professional mixed martial arts career: prior to fighting in the UFC, Manel fought in Ryzen. And in Ryzen, he actually fought Kai Sakura. Now, reason that sounds familiar, Kai is the last guy to actually fight Alexander Pantoja for the flyweight championship, making his debut inside the UFC coming from Ryzen. So Manel has fought him twice. Manel fought him in 2018 and fought him in 2019, where he lost in 2018, but then ended up in the rematch beating Kai Sakura via knockout. So safe to say, Manel has had good victories both within and outside of the UFC. But when we look at his UFC career, he debuted all the way back in 2021, and out of his 3 losses, 2 of them came in his very first 2 fights within the UFC. Basically had a rough start. Made his debut against Alexander Pantoja, probably the roughest debut you could have inside the UFC. Now, obviously at the time, Alexander wasn't the buzzsaw he is today. But Manel managed to make his debut against Pantoja, ended up losing via unanimous decision. Then in his second fight, fought Matthias Nicolai and basically lost once again, but this time by a split decision. And then after that loss, went on a 4-fight winning streak, beating the likes of Ode Osborne, Zalga Zhumagulov, David Dvorak, and Felipe dos Santos. And in those 4 fights, beat Felipe dos Santos via unanimous decision, beat David Dvorak via unanimous decision, but ended up knocking out Ode Osborne and ended up TKOing basically Zalga Zhumagulov. Now, with regards to the knockout of Ode Osborne, insane. You love seeing a flying knee knockout, especially when it looks like this, when it's so methodical. It's like looking at a piece of art. And in his second win inside of the UFC against Zalga Zhumagulov, a brilliant right hand that basically started off and putting the beat on Zhumagulov, getting the TKO victory. Really impressive wins. So goes on to win, beat Ode Osborne via TKO, goes on to beat Zhumagulov via TKO, beats David Dvorak via unanimous decision, and then beats Felipe dos Santos via unanimous decision. A fight which was the fight of the night, and actually got him a performance bonus, which he would probably have had early in his UFC career against Ode Osborne. But seeing that he missed weight, he wasn't eligible for basically receiving a bonus for whether it be performance or fight of the night. Then went on to fight mma-guru. Now with the lead up to this fight, a lot of shit was spoken on both sides, where it ended up being, and the realization was that the press conference in itself with Kape and Mokaev and the weigh-ins and everything building up to it was better than the fight times 10. Probably one of the most underwhelming performances by both men. And after that fight, Muhammad Mokaev, who was unbeaten by the way, was cut by the UFC. So Manel Kape, after beating Felipe dos Santos, loses to Muhammad Mokaev and then basically bounced back, fighting Bruno Silva in a potential fight of the night, where he and Bruno Silva went to war and ended up getting the TKO victory over Bruno Silva, basically finding himself in the main event of UFC Fight Night, Kape versus Almabayev. So with regards to Manel Kape's professional career, seeing that 19 of his fights has come outside of the UFC, and obviously 8 of them within the UFC. He has a lot of experience with regards to his professional career, and has had good victories over the likes of Bruno Silva, over the likes of Felipe dos Santos. Kai Asakura has previously mentioned that he beat, prior to being in the UFC, he has fought Alexandre Pantoja, and after his victory over Bruno Silva, actually went to Dana White when Dana was sitting cage side and requested for a title fight. Now, obviously, didn't come to fruition, but do think that this might end up being a potential #1 contender fight for Alexandre Pantoja. Now, when looking at Manel's opponent, when looking at Asu Almabayev, and with regards to his professional career, so Asu Almabayev has had 23 professional fights, where he's won 21 of them and lost 2 of them. Inside of the UFC, he's had 4 fights, managed to win all 4 of them. The last time Asu Almabayev actually lost was almost 8 years ago, in 2017. So, safe to say, man's been dominant for almost 8 years now. And he made his debut in August of 2023, where he went on to fight Ode Osbourne and actually received a Performance of the Night bonus due to the fact that he was able to submit Ode Osbourne in the second round via rear naked choke. Then, after winning and defeating Ode Osbourne, went on to win another 3 consecutive fights within the UFC, where he fought the likes of CJ Vergara, Jose Johnson, and in his last fight, fought Matthias Nicolai. Now, when looking at his last fight, wasn't smooth sailing, to say the least, where he had to battle through some adversity to actually beat Matthias Nicolai. And all 3 of those fights, after his debut inside the UFC, won all of them by unanimous decision. And once again, stating the obvious, did it against Matthias Nicolai as well, where the first round, Almabayev ended up winning due to the fact that it took 4 minutes for Matthias Nicolai to actually register his very first significant strike in that fight. But in the second round, almost ended up submitting Almabayev via a guillotine choke, where it was so deep that a lot of people thought was probably the end, due to the fact that it was so tight that Almabayev's shorts started to fall off. And they actually had to, after Almabayev escaped that guillotine attempt, referee actually had to stop the fight and give time for Almabayev to pull up his shorts. After that, in the third round, ended up knocking down Matthias Nicolai and ended up winning the fight by unanimous decision, so had to battle through some adversity with regards to his UFC career. And when we look at both men, and if we look at common opponents, both of them has fought Ode Osbourne, both of them has fought Matthias Nicolai. The only difference is Almabayev managed to beat both of them, where obviously Manel Kape ended up beating Ode Osbourne via a spectacular flying knee, but then ended up losing against Matthias Nicolai prior to the Ode Osbourne fight. So obviously, one man undefeated inside of the UFC, the other man, obviously not. But when looking at their respective careers, especially within the UFC, not a lot of experience. Seeing that the one man has had 8 fights, the other man has had 4 fights. When looking at the amount of fights they've had outside of the UFC, where Manel has had 19 and Almabayev has had 19. So somewhat similarly experienced with regards to both men. And do think that this can genuinely be a #1 contender fight to see who faces probably Alexandre Pantoja. But that is basically how we got here to the main event of UFC Fight Night, Manel Kape versus Asu Almabayev. Now let me know early predictions in the comment section. Who do you think is going to win this fight? We basically have the striker versus the grappler. I would really appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your day.